morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Hope you're having a good time with your family and friends and liking these sessions. In today's video on Azure, I'm here to discuss Azure Arc Enabled SQL Server. So in today's session, we'll see what are the prerequisites and once a SQL Server is enabled through Azure Arc, what you can do this on the cloud side. Now, typically when I'm having discussion with a customer and ask them a question, in a group of people that how many folks they have moved their data center 100% to the cloud. Typically, I get a response of close to 20 to 25%. It means still 80% of the folks they have their databases, for example, on-prem, or they have some sort of hybrid kind of deployment. And this can be from the fact that you need to keep maybe your databases on-prem because of the compliance reason. This come across in certain regulated industries, or maybe because of the application or latency reason, you still need to keep the database closer to your application maybe. But does that mean even if your databases are sitting on-prem, you can make or take advantage of the cloud? That's where Azure Arc will come into play. And for today's session, I'm going to take example of a SQL instance that I have with the name IASWS, which is sitting on-prem in my data center. So let's start with some of the prerequisites that you need to be aware of in order to enable this. So from the prerequisite perspective, obviously you need to make sure that you have the required access to the Azure subscription. This can be either contributor, or you can be a connected machine, onboarding role. As you know, as part of this deployment, we need to deploy an agent. Here, it can be called a connected machine agent or an Azure Arc agent, right? So this needs to be deployed, but you need to have these roles in order to do that particular work. Now, secondly, you need to make sure that you have the resource provider registered at the subscription level. So these are typically Microsoft dot Azure Arc data, and also Microsoft dot hybrid compute. You can go and check under the subscription, make sure that both of these are registered. If not, you can go and register that, and then you'll be able to deploy the Arc agent on your on-prem machines. Now, from the network perspective, because there is going to be an outbound connectivity to Azure Arc service, so from the security perspective, you don't need to worry about. First of all, this is all encrypted. So any communication which is going to happen is outbound. And this communication happens over the TCP port 443. Now, by default, this agent is going to use the default route to internet to reach Azure Arc service. But in case, you can also configure a proxy server for this agent configuration. Something to point out from the networking perspective. But Microsoft is not going to have visibility of any data which is sitting, or the databases which are configured on the SQL. It will have information about like what kind of version you're running on the SQL server, fully qualified domain name. But other than that, you won't have any information about the databases that you might be having, tables and all that in your SQL instance. So you can be rest assured that you're protected from that perspective. Now, once you do that and your SQL Server visibility now into Azure, enabled through Azure Arc via this connected machine agent. Now, there are a lot of stuff you can do, which as an administrator you might want to do, right? Or you may not even be aware of that, these are some of the things which are missing on your SQL instance. For example, you can have prac- practice assessment. Now, once you enable this, it is going to scan your SQL instance. And once it scans the SQL instance, it is going to make recommendation for you, right? Now, how long it's going to take will depend upon obviously the size of the databases and the number of objects in it. But typically, if you do that, it's on an average, it's going to take 10% of CPU consumption. So in case you're enabling this, just make sure that from the CPU perspective, that is how much it's going to take from the performance. So you got to make sure that there is no impact on the performance. But once you scan it and once the full scan is done, it will give information about obviously the SQL Server and database configuration and what are the best practices recommended by Microsoft for you, right? It gives also make recommendation about the index management. In case any deprecated features, it will also highlight that. And also any enabled or missing trace flags. Now, this can be important information in case you want to, manage the server as per the best recommendation from Microsoft. And also, one thing I want to point out, in order to do this, in order to run this assessment, an agent will be required to be deployed, what you call Azure Monitor Agent. And if it's already not there, once you enable this, it will also deploy that. And this will require a log analytic workspace, because that is where the data will be stored for this assessment. Now, in case you have, now you need to have actually, and there certain things have been changed from the Microsoft, from the licensing perspective. Now, let's say that if you have licensing on-prem, then you might not be able to utilize this feature. You need to either have a pay-as-you-go license or need to have a license with software assurance in order to make utilize of this feature, right? But you can go and enable this best practices assessment. And as I mentioned, it will take time depending upon how much data you have, how many objects, and how many database you have. It requires an Azure monitoring agent with a log analytic workspace, because that's the place is going to store all the data. And once the scan is enabled, it will give and make recommendation about your database config, index management, deprecated features, any enabled or missing trace flag, which can be handy information, right? So this is one of the things obviously you can do. You can also have update management. Obviously, service needs to be updated, right? You can make use of enabled through this Azure Arc. You can use, so Update Manager is one of the service within Azure, and this can be utilized for updating your workloads, because once this is projected into Azure, as it becomes an Azure resource, and you can apply the policy updates and everything that you typically do with your any Azure resource. Now, other thing that you can do from the management perspective is backup. Now, this is in preview, so certain things might change. And the backups can be enabled at the database level or at the instance level. You have both the options. But let's say both database and instance level backup is configured or scheduled, then the database level schedule will take precedence. In case both are scheduled at the database and instance level, right? Now, when it comes to configuring your backup policy, there are two properties you can tweak. Number one is retention. Now, this can be configured, for example, how many days you want to retain the backup copy. It can be between 1 to 35 days. And number two is how often you want to do the backup. Now, this can be configured as full backup. Then you also have this option of differential. And when we're talking about any SQL backup, then we also need to take care of the transactional log backup. And when it comes to full, it can be daily or weekly. The differential can be every 12-hour or 24 hours. And when it comes to the transactional, it can be incremental of 5 minutes. But these are the two properties you can configure. One is obviously the retention, and the other one is the schedule. So this can be also configured for you. But as I mentioned, from the management perspective, if you have multiple sites, like I have multiple on-prem sites, I also have maybe my SQL sitting in some other third-party cloud, right? This will give me one bird's eye view of what is happening across different sites from the database perspective, and makes the management far more easier, right? So let me just quickly show you on the portal. But before I do that, actually, let me, as I said, I have this IAS server sitting in my data center. And I've already enrolled this. I've shown you before too, how you can enroll this by utilizing the connected machine agent. But let me quickly show you. So I have a couple of databases. I have DB1, DB2, DB3. This is sitting in my data center. I've enrolled this to Azure Arc through connected machine agent. And once you do that, now let me go to the portal and go for Azure Arc service. You can see this server at two places. So under Azure Arc resource, I can go under machine. So this is the machine I'm talking about. You can see that it's in connected status. Or I can also go under data services. I have the SQL Server instance, and I can get that information from here too. So if I go and expand, I will get important information about SQL instance type, right? What version I'm running. So in this case, is Server 2022. I'm running a developer edition in this case, right? And inventory upload, usage upload. So under SQL Server configuration and the properties, you can see that I have license only, right? It also tells me what version of extension of SQL Server I'm running. What is the status of my agent, right? Now, if I go and expand my license, as I mentioned, in order to utilize some of these services, you need to have pay as you go or a license with software assurance. So in this case, you can see I have license only. So this is the developer edition I'm running. I can go and switch on license with software assurance, which I'm going to do in a moment. But this is all the information that I have over here that I can make utilize of. So let me go back to where I was. Now, looking into best practice assessment, which I was discussing, and as I said, it's going to make recommendation for me. It is asking me to change the license type. So this is only available with software assurance, right? Subscription or pay as you go. So in my case, as I said, that is license only. So I can go and enable this. Let's say if I say that I have a license with software assurance and click on save button, I will have this option of doing the best practice assessment, right? So if I go and refresh this, now I can go inside because I've enabled this. And as I mentioned that in order to do this, it will ask you to create a Loganalytic workspace if you have not already. In my case, I already have one, so I can go and enable this assessment, and it will make recommendation, and it's going to take on an average 10% of CPU. It will have impact, so make sure that you have that much buffer available in your on-prem machine, right? I can also go and enable my backups, right? So these are the databases that I have on-prem. I can enable this at the instance level, or I can go at the individual database level. So if I do at both, if in the schedule policy, as I mentioned, if it is at schedule includes both instance as well as at the database level, the one at the database level will take precedence, right? So let's go and just expand this. So you can go and have point in time restore backup. You can go and have up to 35 days, right? That is for how long you can keep the backup copy, right? You also have this option of configuring your full backup. It can be daily, weekly. When it comes to differential, you can pick between 12 to 24 hours, and for transactional, it's going to be, as you can see here, increments of 5 minutes, right? But this is in preview right now, so certain things might change, but you can also configure backup for your SQL Server enabled through Azure Arc. So we talked about best practices assessment, we talked about the backups. You can also go and enable the updates, right? You can make utilize of update management, and make sure that your SQL Server is updated, patched, which is very critical for any kind of SQL Server that you're running, right? But these are some of the things that you can get from the SQL Server admin perspective or database admin perspective. You don't need to have or don't need to worry about silos. As I mentioned, that you might be having multiple sites that you have to manage, and these sites can spread from your on-prem sites, right? Some third party. The Azure Arc will give you visibility across all these different sites, and you can manage everything from one interface as if it's an Azure native resource. So this was a quick overview of SQL Server and Azure Arc. Hope you found this useful. Thanks for watching. Have a good day.